Marcus Williams pulled his old Toyota Camry into the parking lot of Betty's Diner just as the sun began to set behind the small town of Millbrook. The neon sign flickered weakly against the growing darkness, casting an unsteady red glow across the cracked asphalt. He had been driving for nearly 6 hours straight, making his way back from a job interview in the city. The interview had gone well, better than he had expected, and he felt a cautious optimism that had been rare in his life lately. At 28 years old, Marcus had been struggling to find steady work since being laid off from the warehouse 3 months ago. The bills were piling up, and his savings account had dwindled to almost nothing. This job opportunity as a logistics coordinator at a major shipping company could change everything for him and his younger sister Maya, who was depending on him to help pay for her college tuition. The diner looked like a relic from the 1950s, with its chrome exterior and large windows that revealed red vinyl booths inside. A few pickup trucks and an old sedan were scattered across the parking lot. Marcus checked his phone and saw that it was just past 7 in the evening. He had promised Maya he would be home by 9, and he still had an hour and a half of driving ahead of him. But he was exhausted and hungry, and the thought of driving on an empty stomach through winding country roads did not appeal to him. As he walked toward the entrance, Marcus noticed 2 police cruisers parked at the far end of the lot. He thought nothing of it at first. Officers often stopped at diners for coffee and meals during their shifts. He pushed through the glass door, hearing the familiar chime of a bell announcing his arrival. The diner was about half full, mostly occupied by locals who looked like they had been there for hours, nursing cups of coffee and sharing quiet conversations. The smell of fried food and fresh coffee filled the air. A middle-aged waitress with graying hair and a tired smile approached him. "Just one tonight, honey?" she asked, grabbing a menu from behind the counter. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied politely. "Could I get a booth, please?" She led him to a booth near the window, where he could see his car in the parking lot. Marcus slid across the vinyl seat and accepted the menu, though he already knew what he wanted. A burger, fries, and a Coke would be perfect after the long day. As he waited for the waitress to return, Marcus pulled out his phone to text Maya about the interview. He had good news to share, and he knew she would be excited to hear how things had gone. The potential employer had seemed impressed with his experience and had hinted that a decision would be made quickly. "What can I get for you?" the waitress asked when she returned, her pen poised over her order pad. "I'll have the cheeseburger with fries and a Coke, please," Marcus said, handing her the menu. "How do you want that burger cooked?" "Medium is fine, thank you." As the waitress walked away, Marcus noticed 2 police officers sitting at the counter. They had been watching him since he walked in, and their attention made him slightly uncomfortable. He had done nothing wrong, but the intense scrutiny felt unusual. One of the officers was older, probably in his 50s, with gray hair and a thick mustache. The other was younger, maybe in his 30s, with close-cropped brown hair and sharp features. Marcus tried to ignore their stares and focused on his phone, responding to a text from Maya asking about his day. He told her about the interview and that he would be home soon, but he could feel the officer's eyes on him, and the feeling of being watched made it difficult to relax. When his food arrived, Marcus thanked the waitress and began eating. The burger was better than he had expected, and he realized how hungry he had been. He ate slowly, savoring the meal and trying to push away the nagging feeling that something was not right about the way the police officers were watching him. About halfway through his meal, the older officer stood up from the counter and walked over to Marcus's booth. The younger officer remained at the counter but turned to face the booth, his hand resting casually on his belt near his radio. "Excuse me," the older officer said, his voice carrying an edge of authority that immediately put Marcus on alert. "Can I ask what you're doing in town tonight?" Marcus looked up from his burger, surprised by the question. "I'm just passing through, officer. Having dinner before I drive home." "Where's home?" the officer pressed, his eyes scanning Marcus from head to toe. "About an hour and a half from here. I was in the city today for a job interview." The officer nodded slowly, but his expression remained skeptical. "What kind of job interview?" Marcus felt his stomach tighten. The questions seemed unnecessary and intrusive, but he knew better than to be anything other than cooperative. Logistics coordinator at a shipping company. Mind if I see some identification? The request caught Marcus off guard. He had not been speeding, had not committed any traffic violations, and was simply having dinner at a public restaurant. But he reached for his wallet anyway, knowing that refusing would only make the situation worse. He handed over his driver's license, and the officer studied it carefully, comparing the photo to Marcus's face. Marcus Williams, the officer read aloud. Says here you're from Riverside. That's right. Long way to come for a job interview. There aren't any shipping companies closer to home. Marcus felt a flush of irritation, but kept his voice steady. This was a good opportunity. The company has a strong reputation. The officer handed back the license, but remained standing beside the booth. What kind of car are you driving tonight? The gray Toyota in the parking lot. Mind if we take a look at it? Now Marcus was truly confused and beginning to feel anxious. Is there a problem, officer? I haven't done anything wrong. Just being thorough, the older officer replied, though his tone suggested that Marcus's cooperation was not really optional. We've had some reports of suspicious activity in the area tonight. Marcus had no idea what kind of suspicious activity they might be referring to, but he sensed that arguing would only make things worse. I suppose that would be okay. The officer motioned to his partner, who stood up from the counter and joined them at the booth. This is Officer Rodriguez, the older officer said, introducing his partner. I am Sergeant Patterson. We're just going to take a quick look at your vehicle, if that's all right with you. Marcus nodded reluctantly and slid out of the booth. He left his food on the table and followed the two officers outside into the parking lot. Several other diners had turned to watch through the window, and Marcus felt embarrassed by the attention. At his car, Sergeant Patterson asked Marcus to open the trunk. Marcus used his key to pop the trunk, revealing a small suitcase, some jumper cables, and a box of emergency supplies. The officers used their flashlights to examine the contents, moving items around and looking under the spare tire. What's in the suitcase? Officer Rodriguez asked. Just clothes for my trip. I stayed overnight in the city last night. Patterson unzipped the suitcase and rifled through Marcus's clothing, pulling out shirts and pants and examining them closely. Marcus watched in growing disbelief as the officers treated him like a criminal suspect. Can you explain why you're really here tonight? Rodriguez asked, his voice taking on a more aggressive tone. I told you, I had a job interview. I'm just driving home. We're going to need to search the inside of the car as well, Patterson said, ignoring Marcus's explanation. Marcus felt his heart rate increase. Do you have a warrant for this search? The two officers exchanged glances. We don't need a warrant if you give us consent, Patterson replied. And refusing to cooperate would be suspicious. The implication was clear. Marcus could refuse the search, but doing so would likely escalate the situation in ways he could not predict. He was tired, hungry, and just wanted to get home to his sister. Fine, he said, but I don't understand what this is about. The officers spent the next 20 minutes going through every inch of Marcus's car. They pulled out floor mats, looked under seats, opened the glove compartment, and examined every pocket and compartment they could find. They found nothing more incriminating than an expired insurance card and some loose change. During the search, Patterson questioned Marcus repeatedly about his background, his job history, his family, and his reasons for being in the area. Marcus answered each question honestly, but he could tell that the officers were not satisfied with his responses. You seem nervous, Rodriguez observed, watching Marcus's face carefully. I am nervous, Marcus admitted. I don't understand why I'm being treated like a suspect when I haven't done anything wrong. People who haven't done anything wrong don't usually get nervous around police, Patterson said with a smirk. The comment stung, and Marcus felt his frustration building. He had been taught from a young age to be respectful and cooperative with law enforcement, but this treatment felt fundamentally unfair. He was being harassed for no apparent reason, and the officers seemed to be enjoying his discomfort. When the search was finally complete, The officers had found nothing suspicious or illegal. Marcus thought they would apologize and let him go, but instead, they continued to detain him in the parking lot. "We're going to need to run a background check," Patterson announced. "Make sure there aren't any outstanding warrants." Marcus knew there were no warrants. He had never been arrested, had only received a single speeding ticket in his entire life, and had never been in any kind of serious legal trouble. But he also knew that arguing would be pointless. Rodriguez called him Marcus's name and license number over his radio, and they all waited in the parking lot while the dispatcher ran the check. Marcus stood next to his open car, feeling exposed and humiliated under the bright lights of the parking lot. Other customers continued to enter and leave the diner, and many of them stared at the scene with curiosity. The radio crackled after several minutes, and the dispatcher confirmed that there were no outstanding warrants or issues with Marcus's record. Patterson seemed disappointed by the news. "All right, you're free to go," he said reluctantly. "But I'd suggest you finish your dinner quickly and get back on the road. We don't like people hanging around town after dark." Marcus bit back the angry response that wanted to come out of his mouth. Instead, he simply nodded and got back in his car. He watched the officers return to their cruisers before going back inside the diner to finish his meal. His food had grown cold during the search, and his appetite was largely gone. But he forced himself to eat, partly out of principle and partly because he needed the energy for the drive home. The waitress approached his table with a concerned expression. "You okay, honey? That looked pretty intense." "I'm fine," Marcus replied, though he was anything but fine. "Just a misunderstanding." But as he sat in the booth, picking at his cold fries, Marcus could not shake the feeling that what had happened was not a misunderstanding at all. The officers had targeted him from the moment he walked into the diner, and their treatment of him had been deliberate and humiliating. He finished what he could of his meal, paid his check, and left a tip for the waitress, who had been kind to him throughout the ordeal. As he walked back to his car, Marcus noticed that the police cruisers were still in the parking lot, and he could see the officers watching him from their vehicles. The drive home was tense and uncomfortable. Marcus kept checking his rearview mirror, half expecting to see flashing lights behind him. His mind raced as he tried to process what had happened and why he had been singled out for such treatment. By the time he reached his apartment, Marcus felt drained and angry. Maya was waiting for him in the living room, excited to hear about his job interview. But when she saw his expression, her enthusiasm quickly faded. "What happened?" she asked. "Did the interview not go well?" Marcus sank onto the couch beside his sister and told her about the encounter at the diner. Maya listened with growing outrage, her hands clenched into fists as he described the search and the officer's behavior. "That's not right," she said when he finished. "They can't just harass people like that for no reason." "I know it's not right," Marcus replied. "But what am I supposed to do about it?" Maya was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she looked at her brother with determination in her eyes. "We're going to do something about this. What happened tonight was wrong, and someone needs to be held accountable." Marcus appreciated his sister's support, but he felt helpless and frustrated. He had been humiliated and treated like a criminal, and he had no idea how to seek justice for what had happened. All he could do was hope that he never had to drive through Millbrook again. The next morning brought no relief from the anger and frustration that had kept Marcus awake most of the night. He sat at his small kitchen table, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold while he replayed the events at Betty's Diner over and over in his mind. Maya had already left for her morning classes, but not before making him promise to think seriously about filing a complaint. Marcus had never filed a police complaint before. He was not even sure how the process worked or whether anyone would take his concerns seriously. The officers had not technically done anything illegal. They had not arrested him, had not used excessive force, and had eventually let him go. But the experience had left him feeling violated and angry in a way that was difficult to articulate. Around 10 in the morning, his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he did not recognize, and for a moment he hesitated to answer. Given yesterday's events, he was feeling paranoid about unexpected calls. "Hello," he answered cautiously. "Is this Marcus Williams?" The voice on the other end was professional and friendly, belonging to a woman who sounded like she was in her 40s. "Yes, this is Marcus. Mr. Williams, my name is Jennifer Chun, and I'm calling from Consolidated Freight Solutions. You interviewed with us yesterday for the logistics coordinator position." Marcus felt his heart rate spike. This was the call he had been hoping for, but given everything that had happened since the interview, he had almost forgotten about the job opportunity. "Yes, I remember. Thank you for calling. I'm pleased to tell you that we would like to offer you the position. Your experience and qualifications really impressed our team, and we think you would be a great fit for our company." For the first time in months, Marcus felt a surge of genuine excitement. The job offer represented a fresh start, a chance to get back on his feet financially, and help Maya with her education expenses. "That's wonderful news. Thank you so much." Jennifer went on to discuss salary, benefits, and a potential start date. The compensation package was better than Marcus had dared to hope for, with health insurance and opportunities for advancement. They wanted him to start the following Monday, which was only 5 days away. After ending the call, Marcus immediately called Maya to share the good news. Her excitement was infectious, and for a few minutes, the events at the diner seemed less important. But as the day wore on, the memory of his humiliation continued to gnaw at him. That afternoon, Marcus drove to the public library to research police complaint procedures. He wanted to understand his options before making any decisions about how to proceed. The librarian, a kind elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, helped him find information about civilian oversight boards and police accountability measures. What Marcus learned was both encouraging and discouraging. On one hand, there were formal processes for filing complaints against police officers who engaged in misconduct. On the other hand, the process was complex, time-consuming, and often ineffective. Many complaints were dismissed without serious investigation, and even substantiated complaints rarely resulted in meaningful consequences for the officers involved. Mrs. Henderson noticed his frustration as he read through various documents and articles. "Research project for school?" she asked gently. Marcus hesitated, then decided to tell her about his experience. Mrs. Henderson listened with a sympathetic expression, shaking her head at appropriate moments. "That sounds absolutely awful," she said when he finished. "I'm so sorry that happened to you. I'm just not sure if it's worth pursuing a complaint. It seems like a lot of effort for very little chance of results." Mrs. Henderson was quiet for a moment, then leaned closer. "Can I tell you something? My nephew went through something similar a few years ago. He was stopped and searched for no good reason, treated terribly by officers who seemed to think he was guilty of something just because of how he looked." Marcus nodded, unsurprised to hear that his experience was not unique. "He almost didn't file a complaint either," Mrs. Henderson continued. "But his mother convinced him to do it, not because she expected the officers to be punished, but because she wanted there to be a record of what happened. She said that if enough people documented these experiences, eventually someone would have to pay attention." The conversation stayed with Marcus as he drove home that evening. He was still undecided about filing a complaint, but Mrs. Henderson's story had given him a new perspective on the situation. That night, Maya came home from classes full of energy and opinions. She had spent the day researching police accountability herself and had compiled a list of organizations that helped people navigate complaint processes. "Look," she said, spreading printouts across the kitchen table. "There's the Civilian Review Board, the Police Accountability Office, and several civil rights organizations that might be able to help." Marcus appreciated his sister's enthusiasm, but he was still reluctant to commit to what seemed like a long and potentially fruitless process. "I just want to put this behind me and focus on the new job," he said. "I understand that," Maya replied. "But what if this happens to someone else? What if next time it's worse?" Her words hit Marcus hard because he had been thinking the same thing. The officer's behavior had seemed routine and practiced, suggesting that Marcus was not their first victim. How many other people had been subjected to similar treatment? How many had simply accepted it and moved on without saying anything. The next day was Thursday, and Marcus had planned to spend it preparing for his new job. But instead, he found himself thinking constantly about the diner incident. He called Jennifer Chun back to confirm some details about his employment and to ask about the company's policies regarding employee background checks. "We did run a standard background check as part of the hiring process," Jennifer confirmed. "But it came back completely clean. You have an excellent record, Mr. Williams." The confirmation of his clean background made the officers' treatment even more galling. They had detained and searched him despite having no legitimate reason to suspect wrongdoing. That evening, Marcus made his decision. He called Maya into the living room and told her that he wanted to file a formal complaint. "I've been thinking about what you said," he explained. "If I don't speak up, these officers will keep treating people this way. Maybe my complaint won't change anything, but at least there will be a record." Maya was thrilled by his decision and immediately began helping him prepare. They spent the next several hours writing a detailed account of everything that had happened at Betty's Diner, including the specific questions the officers had asked and their behavior during the search. Marcus also decided to call the diner to see if they had any security cameras that might have recorded parts of the incident. The manager, a friendly man named Bob, was sympathetic when Marcus explained what had happened. "I remember seeing the whole thing," Bob said. "Those officers come in here sometimes, and I've noticed they tend to focus on certain customers more than others, if you know what I mean." Bob's comment was carefully worded, but Marcus understood the implication. The officers had a pattern of targeting people based on their appearance or other characteristics. "We do have cameras in the parking lot," Bob continued. "I'm not supposed to give out footage without a court order, but if you file an official complaint, I'd be willing to cooperate with any investigation." This was encouraging news. Video evidence would strengthen Marcus's complaint significantly and might provide objective documentation of the officer's behavior. On Friday morning, Marcus drove to the police accountability office to file his complaint in person. The building was a modest structure downtown, with a small waiting area and a receptionist who looked like she had been dealing with similar situations for many years. Marcus was eventually called into an office where he met with an investigator named David Park. Park was younger than Marcus had expected, probably in his early 30s, with an earnest demeanor that was immediately reassuring. "Tell me what happened," Park said, pulling out a legal pad and settling back in his chair. Marcus recounted the entire incident in detail, referring to the written account he and Maya had prepared. Park took extensive notes and asked clarifying questions about specific aspects of the officer's behavior. "Based on what you're telling me, it sounds like the officers may have violated several departmental policies," Park said when Marcus finished. "The search of your vehicle was questionable, and their questioning seems to have been unnecessarily intrusive given the circumstances." Marcus felt a surge of validation. For the first time since the incident, someone in authority was acknowledging that the officer's behavior had been inappropriate. "What happens next?" Marcus asked. "I'll open a formal investigation," Park explained. "I'll interview the officers involved, review any available evidence, and try to determine whether policies were violated. The process usually takes several weeks, but I'll keep you informed of our progress." Park also provided Marcus with information about his rights during the investigation and explained the various possible outcomes. The complaint could be sustained, not sustained, or unfounded, depending on the evidence. Even if sustained, the consequences for the officers could range from additional training to suspension or termination, depending on the severity of the violations. As Marcus left the building, he felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. He had taken action, but he also knew that the process ahead would be challenging and uncertain. The officers would likely deny any wrongdoing, and it would be his word against theirs in many respects. That weekend, Marcus focused on preparing for his new job, which was set to start on Monday. He bought new clothes, organized his documents, and tried to put the diner incident out of his mind. Maya was proud of him for filing the complaint and confident that justice would eventually be served. On Sunday evening, as Marcus was reviewing materials for his first day at Consolidated Freight Solutions, his phone rang. The caller ID showed the number for the Police Accountability Office, which seemed unusual for a Sunday night. Mr. Williams? This is David Park. I'm sorry to call so late, but I want to give you an update on your complaint. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He had not expected to hear back so quickly, and a Sunday night call seemed ominous. I've begun my preliminary investigation, Park continued, and I've already uncovered some concerning information about the officers involved in your incident. What kind of information? I can't go into specific details yet, but I can tell you that both Officer Rodriguez and Sergeant Patterson have had multiple complaints filed against them in the past year. Your complaint is part of what appears to be a larger pattern of questionable behavior. Marcus felt a mixture of vindication and anger. His suspicion that he was not the officer's first victim had been correct. There's something else, Park added. I contacted the diner about their security footage, and the manager was very cooperative. The video clearly shows parts of your interaction with the officers, including the vehicle search. The footage supports your account of events. This was better news than Marcus had dared to hope for. Video evidence would make it much harder for the officers to deny their behavior or claim that Marcus was exaggerating his account. What does this mean for the investigation? Marcus asked. It means your complaint is being taken very seriously. I'm going to be recommending that this case be escalated to our Special Investigations Unit. They handle cases involving potential patterns of misconduct. After ending the call, Marcus sat in his living room feeling overwhelmed by the rapid developments. What had started as a personal complaint was apparently becoming part of a larger investigation into systemic problems within the Millbrook Police Department. He called Maya to update her on Park's call. She was excited by the news, but also concerned about how the escalation might affect her brother. Are you sure you're ready for this to become a bigger deal? She asked. If this becomes a major investigation, you might end up having to testify or deal with media attention. Marcus had not considered these possibilities, but he realized that Maya was right to be concerned. What he had initially seen as a simple complaint process might become much more complex and public than he had anticipated. But as he thought about it more, Marcus realized that he was committed to seeing the process through regardless of where it led. The officer's behavior had been wrong, and if they had been treating other people the same way, then someone needed to hold them accountable. Monday morning arrived with a mixture of excitement about his new job and anxiety about the ongoing investigation. Marcus dressed carefully, wanting to make a good impression on his first day at Consolidated Freight Solutions. But as he drove toward the city, he could not shake the feeling that his life was about to change in ways he could not predict. Marcus's first day at Consolidated Freight Solutions went better than he had dared to hope. The company occupied a modern office building on the outskirts of the city, with large windows that offered views of the surrounding industrial district. Jennifer Chun met him at reception and gave him a comprehensive tour of the facilities, introducing him to his new colleagues and explaining the company's operations. His direct supervisor was a woman named Patricia Gonzalez, who had been with the company for 8 years and had worked her way up from an entry-level position. She was patient and thorough in explaining Marcus's responsibilities, and she seemed genuinely pleased to have him on the team. We've been short-staffed in this department for months, she told him as they reviewed shipping schedules and inventory reports. Your experience is exactly what we need to get caught up. The work was challenging but engaging, involving coordination between multiple shipping partners, tracking complex logistics chains, and solving problems that required both analytical thinking and practical knowledge. Marcus found himself absorbed in the tasks, and for hours at a time, he was able to forget about the ongoing investigation back in Millbrook. During his lunch break, Marcus called Maya to update her on his first day. She was thrilled to hear that things were going well and reminded him that their mother would have been proud to see him getting back on his feet after the difficult months following his layoff. Mom always said that good things come to people who work hard and do the right thing, Maya said. Look at you now. You got a great job, and you're standing up for yourself against those police officers. Marcus appreciated his sister's encouragement, but he was not sure their mother's optimism about justice and fairness would hold up under the current circumstances. The real world seemed more complicated and less fair than the lessons they had learned growing up. That evening, as Marcus was settling into his apartment after his first day, his phone rang. David Park from the Police Accountability Office was calling with another update. "Mr. Williams, I have some significant developments to share with you about your case," Park began. His tone was serious but excited. "The Special Investigations Unit has taken over your complaint, and they've uncovered much more than we initially expected." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "What kind of developments?" "It turns out that Officers Rodriguez and Patterson have been the subject of multiple complaints over the past 2 years, but those complaints were never properly investigated. The department's Internal Affairs Division seems to have been dismissing complaints without thorough review." This revelation was disturbing, but not entirely surprising to Marcus. He had suspected that the officer's behavior was too practiced and confident to be an isolated incident. "There's more," Park continued. "The special unit has identified at least 6 other individuals who had experiences similar to yours with these same officers. All of the incidents involved traffic stops or encounters at restaurants and other public places, and in each case, the individuals were subjected to searches and questioning that appeared to have been unjustified." Marcus felt a mixture of vindication and anger. The pattern Park was describing suggested systematic harassment rather than isolated incidents of poor judgment. "We've also discovered that both officers have been receiving complaints that were never properly documented. The preliminary investigation suggests that someone in the department may have been actively covering up misconduct." The implications of this statement were staggering. Marcus had filed his complaint expecting, at best, to document his experience and perhaps see the officers receive additional training. Instead, his complaint had apparently exposed a broader pattern of corruption and cover-up within the police department. "What does this mean for my case specifically?" Marcus asked. "Your case is now the centerpiece of a major investigation into police misconduct and departmental corruption. The FBI has been contacted, and there's a possibility that federal charges could be filed against multiple individuals." Marcus sat down heavily on his couch, overwhelmed by the scope of what Park was describing. The simple complaint he had filed just a few days ago had somehow triggered a federal investigation. "Mr. Williams, I want you to understand that your courage in coming forward has made a significant difference. If you hadn't filed your complaint, this pattern of misconduct might have continued indefinitely." After ending the call, Marcus immediately called Maya to share the news. She was speechless for several seconds after he finished explaining the developments. "Marcus, do you realize what this means? You didn't just stand up for yourself. You uncovered a whole system of corruption that was hurting other people." Maya's perspective helped Marcus process what was happening. He had been thinking of his complaint as a personal matter, but apparently it had broader implications for his community and for other victims of police misconduct. The next few days at work provided a welcome distraction from the complexity of the investigation. Marcus threw himself into learning his new responsibilities and building relationships with his colleagues. Patricia Gonzalez was impressed with how quickly he was picking up the systems and procedures, and she had already begun giving him more complex assignments. On Wednesday evening, Marcus received an unexpected visitor at his apartment. David Park had driven out from the city to speak with him in person, which seemed unusual and vaguely ominous. "I wanted to talk to you face-to-face about some developments," Park explained as Marcus led him into the apartment. "The investigation has expanded significantly, and there's some things you need to know about what might happen next." Maya emerged from her bedroom to join the conversation, and Park seemed comfortable including her in the discussion. "The FBI investigation has uncovered evidence that the misconduct goes beyond just Officers Rodriguez and Patterson," Park began. "It appears that supervisory personnel were aware of the complaints and actively participated in covering them up." Marcus felt his stomach drop. The investigation was growing far beyond what he had anticipated when he filed his initial complaint. "We've also discovered financial irregularities that suggest some officers may have been taking money or other compensation in exchange for ignoring certain types of criminal activity." This revelation was shocking. Marcus had expected his complaint to address harassment and improper searches, but Park was describing something that sounded more like organized corruption. The reason I wanted to speak with you in person is that your role in this investigation is likely to become much more prominent. You'll probably be asked to testify before a grand jury, and depending on how the case develops, you might need to testify in federal court. Marcus looked at Maya, who was staring at Park with wide eyes. Neither of them had expected the situation to escalate to this level. What does that mean for Marcus's safety? Maya asked. If there are corrupt police officers who know that he's the one who exposed them, could he be in danger? Park's expression became more serious. We don't have any specific threats to report, but we're taking security precautions seriously. We've been in touch with your local police department to make sure they're aware of the situation. The irony of relying on police protection from corrupt police officers was not lost on Marcus, but he appreciated that Park was taking his concern seriously. There's one more thing, Park added. The investigation has attracted media attention. So far, the reporters don't have your name, but that may change as the case develops. You should be prepared for the possibility that your involvement will become public knowledge. After Park left, Marcus and Maya sat in their living room, discussing the implications of what they had learned. The complaint that had started as a matter of personal principle had evolved into something much larger and more complex. Are you regretting filing the complaint? Maya asked. Marcus considered the question carefully. His life had certainly become more complicated since that night at Betty's diner, but he could not bring himself to regret taking action. No, I don't regret it, but I'm nervous about where this is all heading. I'm proud of you, Maya said. I know this isn't what you expected when you decided to speak up, but you're doing the right thing. The next morning at work, Marcus found it difficult to concentrate on his assignments. His mind kept wandering to questions about the investigation and concerns about how the situation might affect his new job. He had not told anyone at work about the complaint or the federal investigation, and he was not sure whether he should. During his lunch break, Marcus decided to call Jennifer Chun in Human Resources to ask about company policies regarding employee involvement in legal proceedings. He was careful not to provide specific details, but he wanted to understand whether his situation could create problems for his employment. Generally speaking, the company supports employees who are fulfilling their civic duties, Jennifer assured him. If you need time off for court appearances or legal proceedings, we can usually work something out. Is there something specific you're concerned about? Marcus thanked her without providing details, but her response was reassuring. At least his job seemed secure regardless of how the investigation developed. That afternoon, Marcus received a call from a reporter with a local newspaper. Somehow, word about the federal investigation had leaked, and the media was beginning to take interest in the story. I understand you filed the complaint that triggered the FBI investigation into the Millbrook Police Department, the reporter said. Would you be willing to comment on your experience? Marcus was not prepared for media attention and did not know how to respond. He told the reporter that he would need to think about it, and ended the call quickly. Within an hour, he had received calls from 2 more reporters and a request for an interview for a local television station. The story was apparently becoming bigger news than Park had anticipated. Marcus called Park immediately to report the media contact and asked for guidance on how to handle the attention. I was afraid this might happen, Park admitted. The investigation involves multiple federal agencies now, and it's difficult to keep something this big quiet for very long. Park advised Marcus to avoid speaking with reporters until the investigation was complete, but he acknowledged that the media attention was likely to increase rather than decrease in the coming weeks. That evening, Marcus saw his own name mentioned in a brief news article about the FBI investigation. The article did not provide many details about his specific experience, but it identified him as the individual whose complaint had initiated the broader inquiry. Maya was excited to see her brother's name in the paper, but Marcus felt anxious about the loss of privacy. He had never wanted to be a public figure, and the attention made him uncomfortable. You're famous, Maya teased, but she could see that Marcus was not enjoying the notoriety. I just wanted to file a complaint about being harassed, Marcus said. I never expected it to become a federal case with my name in the newspaper. Sometimes doing the right thing has bigger consequences than we expect, Maya replied. But that doesn't mean it's not worth doing. As Marcus prepared for bed that night, he reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in just 1 week. 7 days ago, he had been an unemployed man hoping for a job interview to go well. Now he was employed at a company he enjoyed, but he was also at the center of a federal investigation that was growing more complex by the day. He had no idea what the next week would bring, but he was beginning to understand that his decision to file a complaint had set in motion events that were much larger than his personal experience. Whether he was ready or not, he had become part of something that could have lasting implications for his community and for the cause of police accountability. 2 weeks after Marcus first filed his complaint, the story had become front-page news across the region. The federal investigation into the Millbrook Police Department had expanded to include state authorities, and multiple arrests were expected within days. Marcus found himself at the center of a media storm that he had never wanted and was completely unprepared to handle. The morning started like any other at Consolidated Freight Solutions, but by 10 o'clock, Marcus received a call that would change everything. David Park was on the line, and his voice carried an urgency that immediately put Marcus on alert. "Marcus, I need you to listen carefully. We've made some major breakthroughs in the investigation, and the situation has become more serious than we initially realized." Marcus stepped away from his desk and found a quiet conference room where he could take the call privately. "What kind of breakthroughs?" he asked. "We've discovered evidence that the corruption in Millbrook goes far beyond individual officers taking bribes or covering up misconduct. There's evidence of organized crime connections, money laundering, and drug trafficking protection." Marcus felt his world shift beneath him. What had started as a complaint about harassment had somehow uncovered what sounded like a criminal conspiracy. The FBI raided several locations this morning, including the homes of officers Rodriguez and Patterson, as well as the home of the police chief. They've also seized records from the police department and several local businesses. The implications were staggering. Marcus had assumed that the worst-case scenario would be the termination of a few problematic officers. Instead, it sounded like the entire leadership structure of the Millbrook Police Department might be involved in serious criminal activity. "Marcus, there's something else you need to know. We have credible information that some of the individuals involved in this conspiracy are aware that your complaint triggered the investigation. We're concerned about your safety." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had never considered that filing a complaint about police harassment could put him in actual danger. "What kind of danger are we talking about?" Marcus asked, though he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. "We don't have evidence of any specific threats, but we're dealing with people who have a lot to lose and access to weapons and information. The FBI wants to offer you protection while the investigation continues." Marcus sat down heavily in one of the conference room chairs. The idea of needing federal protection seemed surreal and frightening. What does that mean exactly? It could mean several things, depending on the threat level. At minimum, it would involve increased security awareness and regular check-ins with federal agents. In more serious scenarios, it might mean relocation or witness protection. The mention of witness protection sent a chill through Marcus. He thought about Maya, about his new job, about the life they had been building together. The possibility of having to abandon everything they had worked for was terrifying. "I need to talk to my sister," Marcus said. "Of course. But, Marcus, time is a factor here. The arrests are happening today, and once those people are in custody, the situation could become more unpredictable." After ending the call with Park, Marcus sat alone in the conference room, trying to process what he had learned. He had filed a complaint about being harassed by police officers, and somehow that decision had led to a situation where federal agents were concerned about his physical safety. He called Maya immediately, reaching her between classes at the university. "Maya, I need you to listen carefully and try not to panic," he began, then proceeded to explain what Park had told him. Maya was quiet for a long moment after he finished. When she spoke, her voice was steady but concerned. "Okay, so what do we do now?" "I don't know yet. The FBI wants to meet with both of us this afternoon to discuss security options. I'll cancel my afternoon classes and meet you at home, Maya said without hesitation. We'll figure this out together. Marcus spent the rest of the morning trying to focus on work while his mind raced with questions and concerns. Patricia Gonzalez noticed that he seemed distracted and asked if everything was all right. I'm dealing with some personal issues, Marcus told her, which was true if dramatically understated. I might need to take some time off in the coming weeks. Patricia was understanding and assured him that the company would be flexible with his schedule. Marcus was grateful for her support, but he wondered whether he would still have a job once the full scope of the situation became clear. At noon, Marcus left work and drove home to meet Maya and the FBI agents. Two agents were waiting in an unmarked car outside his apartment building when he arrived. They introduced themselves as Agent Sarah Kim and Agent Michael Torres, and they seemed professional but serious. Inside the apartment, the agents explained the security concerns in more detail. The investigation had revealed that several of the individuals involved in the corruption had connections to organized crime groups that operated across multiple states. These groups had a history of intimidating witnesses and victims who threatened their operations. We're not trying to scare you unnecessarily, Agent Kim explained, but we need you to understand that this situation involves people who take serious risks to protect their interests. Agent Torres pulled out a folder containing photographs and documents. These are some of the individuals who may be arrested today. We wanted to look at these photos and tell us if you recognize anyone. Marcus studied the photos carefully. Most of the faces were unfamiliar, but when he reached the fifth photo, he stopped. The man in the picture looked familiar, though Marcus could not immediately place where he had seen him before. I think I've seen this person before, but I can't remember where, Marcus said. That's Vincent Russo, Agent Torres explained. He owns several businesses in Millbrook, including a trucking company and a restaurant supply business. He's also suspected of being a key figure in the money laundering operation. Maya leaned over to look at the photo. I think I've seen him too, she said. Wasn't he at Betty's Diner the night Marcus was harassed? Marcus thought back to that evening, trying to remember the other customers who had been in the restaurant. There had been several people at the counter and in booths, but he had been focused on his own situation and had not paid much attention to other diners. It's possible, Marcus said. There were other people in the diner that night. Agent Kim made notes about their observations. It's entirely possible that your encounter with Officers Rodriguez and Patterson was not random. If Vincent Russo was at the diner that night, the officers might have been performing some kind of security function for him. This possibility had never occurred to Marcus. He had assumed that the officers had targeted him based on racial profiling or simple harassment. The idea that he might have inadvertently witnessed some kind of criminal activity was both frightening and confusing. The agents went on to explain the security measures they were recommending. For the immediate future, Marcus and Maya would be provided with regular security check-ins and emergency contact procedures. If the threat level increased, they might need to consider more intensive protection measures. What about my job? Marcus asked. I just started this position, and I need the income. We'll work with your employer to ensure that your safety needs don't compromise your employment, Agent Kim assured him. Many companies are very cooperative when federal investigations are involved. After the agents left, Marcus and Maya sat in their living room, trying to absorb everything they had learned. The apartment that had always felt safe and comfortable now seemed vulnerable and exposed. Are you regretting your decision to file the complaint? Maya asked. Marcus considered the question seriously. His life had become complicated and potentially dangerous as a result of his decision to speak up about police harassment. But he also knew that the investigation had uncovered serious criminal activity that was harming his community. No, I don't regret it, he said finally. But I'm scared about what comes next. That evening, the local news reported that federal and state authorities had arrested 8 individuals in connection with a major corruption investigation involving the Millbrook Police Department. The arrests included both police officers and civilian accomplices, and authorities indicated that additional arrests were expected. Marcus watched the news coverage with a mixture of vindication and anxiety. Seeing officers Rodriguez and Patterson being led away in handcuffs was satisfying, but the scope of the criminal activity that had been uncovered was overwhelming. The news report mentioned that the investigation had been triggered by a complaint filed by a local resident, but Marcus's name was not used. However, he knew that his identity was already known to reporters and would likely become public soon. Over the next few days, Marcus tried to maintain his normal routine while adapting to the new security measures. Agent Kim called him twice daily to check in, and he had been given emergency contact numbers that he could call at any time if he felt threatened or noticed anything suspicious. At work, Marcus had explained to Patricia Gonzalez that he was involved in an ongoing legal matter that might require occasional time off for meetings with attorneys and federal agents. She was understanding and supportive, though Marcus could see that she was curious about the details. On Friday afternoon, Marcus received a call that he had been dreading. A producer from a national news program wanted to interview him about his role in exposing the corruption in Millbrook. "Your story is inspiring people across the country," the producer explained. "You're being seen as someone who stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult and dangerous." Marcus was not sure he wanted to be seen as inspiring or heroic. He had simply tried to address what he believed was unfair treatment, and the consequences had spiraled far beyond anything he could have anticipated. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of attention," Marcus told the producer. "I understand your hesitation, but your story could encourage other people to come forward when they witness wrongdoing. Sometimes it takes one person's courage to expose much larger problems." After ending the call, Marcus discussed the interview request with Maya. She was enthusiastic about the opportunity for him to tell his story publicly. "This is your chance to control the narrative," she said. "Instead of letting other people define what happened, you can explain it in your own words." Marcus was still reluctant, but he began to see Maya's point. The story was going to be told whether he participated or not. At least by giving interviews, he could ensure that his perspective was accurately represented. That weekend, Marcus made the decision to give the interview to the national news program. He also agreed to speak with several newspaper reporters who had been requesting interviews for days. The interviews were scheduled for the following week, and Marcus spent the weekend preparing by reviewing his account of events and thinking about the message he wanted to convey. He wanted to emphasize that his decision to file a complaint had been motivated by principle rather than any desire for attention or fame. As he prepared for bed on Sunday night, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed in just 3 weeks. He had gone from being an unemployed man worried about paying bills to being at the center of a federal investigation that was making national news. The journey had been difficult and frightening at times, but Marcus was beginning to understand that his decision to speak up had made a difference that extended far beyond his personal experience. The investigation had protected other potential victims and had exposed criminal activity that might have continued indefinitely if he had remained silent. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and uncertainties, but Marcus felt ready to face them with the knowledge that he had done the right thing, regardless of the personal cost. 6 months after that fateful night at Betty's Diner, Marcus Williams stood before a packed federal courtroom, preparing to give testimony that would help conclude one of the largest police corruption cases in the region's history. The months between his initial complaint and this moment had been a whirlwind of investigations, media attention, and personal growth that had changed his life in ways he never could have imagined. The courtroom was filled with reporters, community members, and family members of other victims who had come forward as the investigation expanded. Maya sat in the front row, offering her brother an encouraging smile as he approached the witness stand. Agent Kim and Agent Torres were also present, having become trusted allies throughout the lengthy process. As Marcus placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, he thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. The nervous, unemployed man who had simply wanted to eat dinner in peace had evolved into someone who was willing to stand up publicly for justice and accountability. The prosecutor Assistant U.S. Attorney Lisa Morrison, had worked closely with Marcus over the past several months to prepare his testimony. She had helped him understand not only the legal aspects of the case, but also the broader implications of what had been uncovered. "Mr. Williams," Morrison began, "can you tell the court about the events of the evening of October 15th, when you visited Betty's Diner in Millbrook?" Marcus took a deep breath and began recounting his experience, speaking clearly and deliberately. He described the harassment by officers Rodriguez and Patterson, the unwarranted search of his vehicle, and the humiliation he had felt throughout the encounter. As he testified, Marcus could see several of the defendants sitting at the defense table. Rodriguez and Patterson looked older and more haggard than he remembered, the weight of the investigation and prosecution having taken an obvious toll. Vincent Russo, the alleged money laundering kingpin, watched Marcus with an expression that was difficult to read. "What made you decide to file a formal complaint about your treatment that night?" Morrison asked. "I realized that if I didn't speak up, these officers would continue treating other people the same way," Marcus replied. "My sister convinced me that someone needed to be held accountable for what had happened." Morrison then guided Marcus through the subsequent events: his meeting with David Park, the discovery of other victims, and the expansion of the investigation. Marcus testified about the security concerns that had arisen and the way the case had affected his life and family. During cross-examination, the defense attorneys tried to portray Marcus as someone seeking attention and financial gain from his complaint. They questioned his motives and suggested that he had exaggerated the severity of his treatment by the officers. Marcus remained calm and consistent in his responses, sticking to the facts of what had happened and avoiding the lawyer's attempts to provoke emotional reactions. The months of preparation with Morrison had taught him how to handle aggressive questioning while maintaining his credibility. "Mr. Williams," one defense attorney asked, "isn't it true that you filed this complaint because you were angry about being unemployed and wanted someone to blame for your problems?" "No, that's not true," Marcus replied firmly. "I filed the complaint because I was treated unfairly and wanted to prevent the same thing from happening to other people." The testimony phase of the trial lasted 3 weeks, with dozens of witnesses providing evidence about the scope of the corruption that had been uncovered. Other victims of police harassment testified about their experiences, painting a picture of systematic abuse that had gone unchecked for years. Perhaps the most damaging testimony came from former police officers who had agreed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for reduced charges. These officers described a culture within the Millbrook Police Department where misconduct was not only tolerated, but actively encouraged by supervisory personnel. One former sergeant testified that officers Rodriguez and Patterson had been specifically assigned to harass certain individuals as part of a broader effort to protect illegal business operations. The harassment was designed to discourage people from spending time in areas where criminal activity was taking place. The financial evidence presented by federal investigators was equally compelling. Bank records, wire transfers, and business documents showed a complex money laundering operation that had moved millions of dollars through seemingly legitimate businesses in Millbrook. Vincent Russo, it turned out, had been at the center of an organization that controlled drug distribution, illegal gambling, and other criminal activities across 3 counties. The corrupt police officers had provided protection for these operations in exchange for regular payments and other benefits. During the trial, Marcus continued working at Consolidated Freight Solutions, though he had to take frequent time off for court appearances and meetings with prosecutors. Patricia Gonzalez and his other colleagues had been incredibly supportive throughout the process, and the company had even issued a public statement praising Marcus for his courage in coming forward. The media attention had been intense, but mostly positive. Marcus had given interviews to several national news outlets, and his story had been featured in magazines and newspapers across the country. He had become something of a symbol for ordinary citizens who were willing to stand up against corruption and abuse of power. The attention had also brought unexpected opportunities. Marcus had been invited to speak at conferences about police accountability and citizen oversight. He had also been contacted by civil rights organizations that wanted him to become involved in their advocacy efforts. Maya had been accepted into law school and had decided to specialize in civil rights law, inspired partly by her brother's experience and the legal proceedings she had witnessed. She planned to work as an advocate for victims of police misconduct after graduation. The financial settlement that Marcus eventually received from the city of Millbrook and the police department was substantial, though he had not pursued the complaint for monetary reasons. He used part of the settlement to establish a scholarship fund for students from low-income families who wanted to pursue careers in law enforcement or criminal justice. As the trial neared its conclusion, Marcus reflected on how the experience had changed his understanding of justice, community, and personal responsibility. He had learned that standing up for what was right often required more courage and persistence than he had initially realized. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning guilty verdicts on virtually all charges against all defendants. Officers Rodriguez and Patterson were convicted of civil rights violations, conspiracy, and accepting bribes. They received sentences of 8 and 10 years in federal prison, respectively. Vincent Russo was convicted on racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy charges that carried a sentence of 25 years in prison. Several other defendants received sentences ranging from probation to 15 years, depending on their level of involvement in the criminal organization. The police chief and 2 other supervisory officers were also convicted and sentenced to prison terms, effectively dismantling the leadership structure that had allowed the corruption to flourish for years. Following the convictions, the city of Millbrook was placed under federal oversight to ensure that reforms were implemented and that the police department was rebuilt with proper accountability measures. A new police chief was hired from outside the community, and all officers were required to undergo additional training on constitutional rights and proper procedures. Betty's Diner, which had been the scene of Marcus's initial encounter with the corrupt officers, became something of a local landmark. Bob, the manager who had cooperated with the investigation by providing security footage, put up a small plaque commemorating the role the restaurant had played in exposing the corruption. Marcus visited the diner several months after the trial concluded, curious to see how it felt to return to the place where everything had started. The experience was surreal, but ultimately positive. Several local residents approached him to thank him for his courage, and Bob insisted that his meal was on the house. The booth where Marcus had been sitting that October night was still there, looking exactly the same as it had 6 months earlier. But everything else about the situation had changed dramatically. The officers who had harassed him were in prison. Their criminal organization had been dismantled, and the community was beginning to rebuild trust in law enforcement. As Marcus sat in that same booth, eating a burger and reflecting on the journey that had brought him back to this place, he felt a profound sense of completion. The frightened and angry young man who had been harassed by corrupt police officers had become someone who understood his own power to create positive change in the world. Maya joined him at the diner that evening, and they talked about the future and the lessons they had learned from the experience. Both of them had been changed by the events of the past 6 months, but they felt stronger and more confident about their ability to face whatever challenges lay ahead. "Do you think you would do it again?" Maya asked. "Knowing everything that happened afterward, would you still file that complaint?" Marcus considered the question carefully. The past 6 months had been difficult, stressful, and sometimes dangerous. His life had been disrupted in ways he never could have anticipated, and he had been forced to confront realities about corruption and injustice that he would have preferred to ignore. But the investigation had also produced meaningful results. Corrupt officers were in prison, criminal organizations had been dismantled, and reforms were being implemented to prevent similar problems in the future. Other victims had received justice, and the community was becoming safer and more accountable. "Yes," Marcus said finally, "I would do it again. It was the right thing to do, even though it was harder than I expected." As they prepared to leave the diner that night, Marcus looked back at the booth where his journey had begun. The young man who had sat there 6 months ago, angry and humiliated by his treatment at the hands of corrupt police officers, could never have imagined how his simple decision to file a complaint would change his life and his community. But that decision had been the beginning of something important and necessary. It had required courage, persistence, and sacrifice, but it had ultimately produced justice and positive change that would benefit countless people for years to come. Marcus Williams had learned that ordinary citizens have extraordinary power to make a difference when they are willing to stand up for what is right, even when the cost is higher than they initially expected. It was a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his life, and one that would continue to guide his actions as he worked to build a more just and accountable society. The drive home from the diner was peaceful and reflective. Marcus had come full circle, but he was not the same person who had made that journey 6 months earlier. He was stronger, more confident, and more aware of his own capacity to create positive change in the world. As he pulled into his apartment complex that night, Marcus felt grateful for the experience that had transformed his life. It had been difficult and sometimes frightening, but it had also been meaningful and ultimately rewarding. He had discovered that one person's courage to speak truth to power could indeed make all the difference, not just for themselves, but for an entire community seeking justice and accountability.